Hello and welcome to Legato short topic training videos. These videos provide a quick look at various Legato features. This video, Hello Y'all, aka Hello World, is a short introduction into Legato. In this video, we're going to do the typical Hello World quick program. We'll take a look at program structure and we'll introduce variables. To begin, open GoFiler if it's not already open. Select File New, and then pick Legato script from the dialog. It's the last item on the list. Once the window's open, type in message box, parenthesis, quote, hello y'all, or whatever you'd like to put in there. Close the quote, close the parenthesis, add a semicolon, and then press F7 to run the program. Going to GoFiler now, we'll move to File, New, select Legato script from the bottom of the new dialog. That'll open up a blank window in the IDE, and we can just begin typing. And then press F7, and that'll run the program. Looking a little closer now, we can see our message box function with its parameters. So we have a built-in SDK function. This function comes from the library of hundreds of functions that are part of the language. We have the function parameters surrounded by parentheses. A single parameter, which happens to be a string, it's surrounded by double quotes. And then finally, a semicolon that marks the end of the statement. A variation of this might be to return a OK cancel or a yes no result. So what I'll do is I'll use the OK cancel SDK function. And I'm going to do an assignment with an equal. So on the left side, I have what's going to be assigned to, and on the right, the evaluated expression, in this case, just a function. That will then go into a return result. That is a variable I would have previously defined. I've also added an icon letter, and what this does is it adds a question mark icon to the message box. I have a similar query string, and I close that with a semicolon as well. Returning to GoFiler, I'm going to just go ahead and delete this, and we'll start our little program. I'm going to make an integer and call it a result with a semicolon. And I'm going to say result equals OK cancel box. I'm going to go ahead and add in the Q. Notice that the Q is in a single quote, indicating it's just a character value. And I'll go ahead and run this. So now I see my message box shows a question mark and OK to delete. When I press OK or cancel, it'll set the value of result, which of course I'm just throwing away because I'm not looking at it in this particular program. So exactly what is Legato? It's a structured interpreted script language. That means that all the instructions in the script are put together and interpreted at the time of running. It's also structured by using blocks and braces similar to C, C++, Java, or JavaScript. Statements are separated by a semicolon character, and blocks or structured groups of statements are contained within braces. A script can be free-flowing or structured, meaning, as you've seen in the prior examples, free-flowing basically means I just type in statements and go ahead and go. I can have ifs and whiles and for loops inside of that, but I don't have any functions. On the other hand, I can structure and have a main function or an entry function, hooks into the application, and etc., and put hundreds and hundreds of functions together to build a large, complex program. Here's an example of counting from 1 to 100 and then dumping the results into the information view. So we'll begin with basically a declaration of integer x, and we'll set x to 1 because we're going to start at 1. By default, it would be 0. And then we're going to set a loop up while x is less than 101. We'll add a message called count with a %d that formats it as a decimal or integer number with x as the parameter. We'll then add 1 to x and continue until x gets to 101. Let's go try this out. For brevity, I'm going to be lazy and just paste in the information. So I'll select everything, delete, and then paste in. So when I press F7, you'll notice it opened up an information view and then loaded it with the counts. And this will then proceed all the way to 100 and stop. A little more about language syntax. Statements. Statements represent an action. In other words, make something equal to some other expression. It could be as simple as saying I equals 6, or something as complicated as taking x and having it equal a series of multiplications or divisions. It's a call to one or more functions to do something, like display a message box. It's a test of a condition, or returning a value to a caller. When writing statements, they can be free-flowing in text. There can be multiple statements per text line or multiple lines per statement. It doesn't matter with the returns. The only limitation is you cannot put a return inside of a string. And they are delineated then by the semicolon or the braces. Let's look a little closer at variables. Legato requires variables to be declared. This is unlike JavaScript, which just has var, or PHP, which you can just simply make variables on the fly. There are 4 types of variables. There are basically integers in various sizes, from 8 bits up to 64 bits. These represent whole numbers, meaning from 1 to, say, 65,000, or -6 to -150,000. There are floating point values. Floating point values, or real numbers, represent values that have decimals in them, a single decimal. These are 64-bit floating point values within Legato. There are strings. And strings are in essence an array of 8-bit characters terminated by a 0. Most of the time you don't even think about this. You just simply have a string like hi there, and that becomes a series of characters. And then we have handles. Handles are numeric values that represent an abstract object like a file or a window or perhaps a string pool or other complex items that can then be manipulated. Variables can also be placed into arrays, allowing me to have long arrays of integers, or perhaps a table of strings of rows and columns that are arranged in whatever order you happen to like. And then finally, functions themselves can have variable types. For example, it can return an integer that says I succeeded or I failed, or maybe a string on a lookup like a query to a dialog. Let's look at a little more complex example with declared variables, loading a file, and we'll dump that out then into the information view of GoFiler. So we have a real short script here. We'll start with the declared variables, and you'll notice we have our strings S1, S2, another string that actually introduces an array of up to 1,000 items, and then integers, those are 32-bit integers, for return code, an index, and then a size. What we're going to do is we're going to read the entire contents of a file, here marked by S2, into a string. Notice the double backslashes. You have to escape backslashes because within a string, backslashes are used to indicate control characters. Once we read that in, we have S1, which will contain that contents. If it has an error, you can check that with the isError function. The isError function then will report the error by getting the last error code and using this SDK function that just simply says, hey, I couldn't find this file, it's a bad path, whatever the case happens to be. Once that succeeds, I'll move on to exploding that particular string, S1, into the array of lines. This is kind of a neat function. There's something similar in PHP. Basically what it does, it says I'm going to take each item delineated by, in this case, a default line return, and throw it in as a record or an array entry into the lines variable. That's then followed up by just simply dumping the result out by getting the array size of lines, and then going from IX, which is by default 0, to size, and just adding the messages over to the information view or the log, and then incrementing the variable IX, and we're introducing a convention that's used in many structured languages here, the plus plus, that just simply is the same as saying IX equals IX plus 1, and then a brace to close that loop. Let's go take a look at that inside of GoFiler. Let's be lazy. I've copied the contents of the script to the clipboard. By the way, the scripts that we've been using within this training are available on the website along with this particular video. I'm going to select all, paste in the new script, and then just hit F7. Now, I already had a file named mytestfile.txt, which was basically just an SEC acceptance message. And you'll see that that's being dumped out line by line, and I can see the number here, for example, 17, is the 17th line or the 18th line if it's zero inclusive. And that's the text of that particular line. I see here the add message function that shows the formatting of that string, 04D. %04D means throw in 4 digits of decimal with leading zeros. and then %s means dump a string out, and that then adds that to the log. You'll notice that this is going into the Legato log. That is the default log. And anytime you start doing add message during a script run, it's going to start building that log, and if it sees data and when it's done, it'll just simply display it. Finally, let's look at one last thing. It's entirely possible as you're doing this. In fact, you will make mistakes. You will type things incorrectly. You'll reference the wrong variables, whatever the case happens to be. When that happens and you're in the IDE, let's make this IX just I, so it's an undefined variable. Another window will pop up. So I'll hit F7, and I can see then I'm going to have Legato errors. And then right below here, it'll say that I is an undefined symbol or name. So this is going to give you a clue as to where your problem is, and you can then come up and fix it. And we'll go ahead and run it again. And that concludes this quick video. Go to www.novaworks.co or novaworkssoftware.com/legato, and you'll find not only these videos, but also any sample files that go along with the videos. Thank you very much.